Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Roundtable Series webinar. My name is Ashley Robinson, and I'm the editor of Spud Smart. Today, I'll be serving as your host for the webinar. Today's webinar theme is prepping your potato seed for spring planting. I'd just like to take a quick second to thank McCain for partnering with us on this Roundtable Series webinar. Today's presenters are Khalil Al-Mughrabi, the Provincial Potato Pathologist with New Brunswick Department of Agriculture, Aquaculture and Fisheries, and Ryan Barrett, the Research and Agronomy Specialist with the PEI Potato Board. At this time, I'd also like to mention that this webinar has been approved to offer 1 CCA credit. We will show the QR code on the screen after the presentations. In today's webinar, you'll learn about the potential seed potato disease concerns, the pros and cons of using pre-cut potato seed tubers compared to whole potato seed tubers, and some results of potato seed planting trials. During the presentation, you'll likely have some questions for our speakers. Please type these into the chat box at any time during the webinar, and we'll address them during the question and answer session after the presentations. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available at spudsmart.com following this live event. Our first presenter is Khalil Al-Mughrabi, who is the Provincial Potato Pathologist with the New Brunswick Department of Agriculture, Aquaculture, and Fisheries. He graduated with a PhD in biology from Dalhousie University in 1994. Khalil has been the Provincial Potato Pathologist for New Brunswick since 2001, and he's the program lead for the Science, Research, and Innovation Program with the New Brunswick Provincial Government and is the provincial representative for the Atlantic Agriculture Research and Innovation Initiative and Federal, Provincial, and Territorial Innovation Working Group. Khalil is the Chair of Education and Training Pillar of Improving Food Self-Sufficiency in New Brunswick Action Plan for Agriculture in the Classroom at the high school and post-secondary curriculum development level. Khalil's an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Agriculture and Faculty of Graduate Studies at Dalhousie University and an adjunct professor in the School of Climate Change and Adaptation at the University of PEI. He previously worked at Al Dafa Applied University in Jordan. His research focuses on potato early dying and late blight management. Khalil is the chairman of the National Late Blight Working Group and has released numerous publications on his research. Take it away, please, Khalil.
Hello, everyone. I'll just dive in. Potato seed treatment is important. One of the most important pest management practices that growers can follow or should follow is planting disease-free certified seed potatoes. So if high-quality seed stock is planted, properly healed after cutting, seed piece decay can be minimal, providing that conditions at planting and consequently after planting following favor rapid emergence and growth. So seed piece treatment can be a valuable insurance in the event conditions deteriorate after planting. In Canada, there are several products that are registered for seed treatments, much of which are targeting Fusarium Dry Rot, as you see in this table, and some target Rhizoctonia and silver scurf. Verticillium wilt disease has one product registered as seed piece treatment, and that is Senator PSPT, while seed-borne late blight has 3 products, Reason, Revis, and Vibrance Ultra. Seed piece treatment can be used to protect those diseases that I mentioned in the table, and we also experimented on common scab and powdery scab to see if they can be controlled or managed that way. The first disease that I will target is seed-borne late blight. You're all familiar with that. You can see the symptoms on the seed here, dark coloration or discoloration on the outer skin of the potato. If you cut it, you see granular discoloration, which shows late blight. When you look at the seed that is infected with a late blight, you could tell from the sprouts that there is something going on. In this case, those potatoes on the top side. There you can tell there's blackening in the tips of the sprouts. I actually had some of potatoes that looked like this, so I put them in a plastic bag with just a tissue paper with moisture in it, and sure enough, on the bottom you can see the fungus was ready to grow within a few days on the seed pieces or seed tubers. And if you plant those seed infected with late blight, it's usually a long battle, and you may not win it. You could see here the mother seed with infection, and the stems have blight already in them. And as the seedling grows, the fungus grows with it, and you see here the fuzz of the late blight fungus on the seedling itself. Now, usually if you plant your seed at 12-inch spacing, you need about 14,500 seed pieces per acre. Now, if you buy a seed lot that only has 1% late blight, you can potentially have 145 seed pieces that are infected with late blight. At 5% level in the seed lot, it's over 700 seed tubers that could potentially be infected. Now, they may not all grow, and that would be good if they die or deteriorate and break down before the plant emerges. But if 1% of these seed pieces emerged, at 12-inch spacing, 1% seed lot infection, you potentially would have one plant that has blight, 7 plants at 5% lot infection. And what does that mean? This shows the effect of one infected seed, which eventually would produce about 10-foot diameter infection in the field, and that grows very fast and spreads. Now, if you've got 1% foliar area affected with late blight, you potentially would have 2 billion spores per acre. Each spore can land on a healthy leaf and can potentially start infection. So if you've got a seed piece that has a little bit of blight in it, and you cut it, if you don't plant it immediately, once you store it in the storage, if the humidity is high, the temperature is high, you can potentially have late blight spores growing on the surface, as you see in this picture. If the humidity is high, you may also see bacteria, and you could see that on the top side of the seed. Usually when you cut seed pieces, you expose infectable surfaces in the healthy seed, and also increase sporulation in the seed that is already infected with late blight. It takes about 8 hours for a tuber-to-tuber infection to occur, about 14 hours for both of them to become infected, and the primary one to be sporulating. Within 4 to 7 days, both seed pieces can be infected and sporulating at the same time. And usually transmission of the blight can occur during loading into the truck, loading into the planter, or during planting. So you may start with one seed piece that is infected among healthy seed and end up with many or most of them infected. Tuber-to-tuber spread of late blight is unlikely during dry storage conditions, but it's possible in wet piles and cull piles. So what do we tell the growers usually in New Brunswick? We say apply the seed treatment immediately after cutting. The whole seed needs to be protected too. Mancozeb-based products can protect against late blight and reduce sporulation. But we should all know that, or we know that no fungicides will make an infected seed into a healthy one. So cut and treat as close to planting as possible. Don't pre-cut and hold a pile, because conditions to unhealing and holding seed before planting can be ideal for late blight growth and spread. So that's my first disease that I wanted to focus on. The second one is Fusarium Dry Rot, and all of us have seen Fusarium in the storages. One of the main important point that I would like to make about Fusarium Dry Rot is that if the seed is healthy, you will not get infection with Fusarium Dry Rot. The tuber has to be either cut or bruised. The skin may not have been set correctly before storage, and that's becomes port of entry for Fusarium Dry Rot and eventually infection with soft rot. And if you plant those seed pieces, you can potentially find misses in the field, like this field was because of a heavy Fusarium Dry Rot infection. We've done experiments in New Brunswick in the storage 2008 and 2009, where we inoculated seed pieces with isolates of Fusarium that were resistant to Senator and Maxim. I want to stress here, they were resistant to Senator and Maxim. The treatments were healthy and disease controls, Senator and Maxim, and also Maxim with Mancozeb, MZ, Tubercil, which had 16% Mancozeb, and at the time there was an experimental product called difenoconazole. Now it's part of several products like Maxim D, Cruiser Max, and Vibrance Ultra. And sure enough, Maxim and Senator did not work as well because the isolate was resistant to them. But Maxim MZ, Tubercil, which have Mancozeb in it, and also the experimental difenoconazole did work really well and prevented rot or reduced it to a very low level. The next disease is Rhizoctonia Canker. And this is the seed and soil-borne disease. Usually you see the symptoms on the stems and the stolons where there's cankers. And these can actually become very restrictive for the movement of nutrients and water into the plants. In severe cases, you may end up with the daughter tubers being infected with black scurf, as you see in the red potato in the middle of the slide here. Eventually, you end up with reduction in marketable yield. A colleague of mine, Loretta McKitzel, and I did some work on Rhizoctonia seed piece treatment, and we included a few products, as you see on this table. A couple of them actually were not registered for Rhizoctonia, and that's Headline and Dithane, and also Senator. But we wanted to add them there as a check. We used Yukon Gold in this case. And Headline and Quadris, they are liquid, so they were applied immediately at the seed piece at planting. And then I prepared the cultures of Rhizoctonia on autoclaved rice seed and eventually added the infected rice seed on the seed pieces at the field, in the field, as you see in this picture. So we included uninoculated control that has no Rhizoctonia and no seed piece treatment, and also inoculated control that has Rhizoctonia but no seed piece treatment. We call it Rhizocno SPT. And this picture shows just visually that most of the treatments worked really good, Senator Maxim and uninoculated control and Headline, compared to the Rhizoctonia with no seed piece treatment. Row there that did not look as well. And we summarized the results by noting that emergence was slow when there was Rhizoctonia infection with no seed piece treatment. Stem numbers were reduced and also marketable yield was reduced. Seed piece treatment or fungicides applied at planting, they both reduced tuber black scurf. However, Senator did not work because it wasn't a product that's registered for it. And the plants with seed piece treatment or fungicides at planting performed better than the inoculated seed piece treatment, except in case of Headline. Again, Headline isn't a product that's registered for black scurf. Common scab is another disease of importance. It's a bacterial disease. pH of soil between 5.5 and 7.5 are favorable for it. it can go through the digestive system of animals, and if you put the manure in onto the field, you spread the disease that way. It affects eventually marketable yield, of course, from the shape of it. We experimented on common scab to see if seed treatment can work. So we have common scab infected seed that has had 5% scab on them. And the treatments, as you see, there were 9 there, untreated control, and some had serenade, which is Bacillus subtilis bacteria. I was experimenting on a bacteria that I grew in my lab too. It's called Enterobacter cluckeae. And we had seed piece treatments with fluoroxanol at different rates. And mancozeb with their own label rates, and also added mustard and manganese as soil additives. And to complete the comparison, we also included chloropicrin and PIC Plus as fumigants. This picture shows how we applied PIC Plus and chloropicrin to the field at McCain's farm. And the results were very good. Generally speaking, the yield was increased in response to all seed piece treatments. Marketable yield increased more when we added serenade, max, which is Bacillus subtilis, fluoroxanol, which is Maxim, mancozeb, and mustard meal when it was added to the soil. Chloropicrin and PIC Plus also increased marketable yield. Disease severity was reduced the most with the use of serenade, fluoroxanol, which is Maxim, mustard meal, and chloropicrin. Next is powdery scab, and it's a fungal disease that can persist in the soil for more than 18 years. And the most important point that I would like to make about it is that it can be a vector for potato mop top virus. We did experiments in 2010, 2011 on calvite and red lasoda, but I'm showing only 1 year just because of time constraints. So the treatments included control and then Allegro at various rates, the regular rate, double rate, and then Maxim and Dithane were also included as seed piece treatment. We used some of the same products as in furrow treatments to see if they would make any difference, included Randman too. And soil additives included sulfur, boron, nitrogen, and mustard meal. And the results for calvite here, disease reduction was almost there for all the treatments. But yield increase was not very significant. There's no significant difference between most of the treatments and the control. However, marketable yield increased in most cases. The best was mancozeb or Dithane. And generally speaking, anything that had mancozeb had positive impact on controlling powdery scab in general terms. And finally, potato virus Y. I borrowed some of these slides from my colleague Matthew Sting and Tyler McKenzie because of the importance of the disease. It can reduce yield by up to 80%, and the quality of the tuber can be affected in case of necrosis like NTN, PVY NTN. The main source of infection from the virus is usually the potato seed, and transmission can be through aphids. A few points just to make here. One is here there in red we had a high PVY year, and in blue we had low PVY year. And in either case, when we planted PVY with low or no virus, the average PVY post-harvest was lower than when we started with PVY with any level in the seed. The second point is that using mineral oil helps a lot. So the same 2 years, And if you see on the left in the purple and blue, when we used oil at 2 liters per acre or higher, the virus level was always low compared to when we had less than 2 liters per acre of mineral oil. And this slide shows the more frequent the oil is used, the better the results were. So when we had 1 liter per acre every 6 to 7 days, we had higher virus level than when we had 2 liters per acre every 5 days. And even better results were achieved when we used 3.75 liters per acre every week. And finally, if you use mineral oil alone or insecticide alone, you don't get the best results to control PVY. The best results are achieved when you use insecticide and oil, and you see that on the third row of columns where the virus level was down by almost 50% compared to either the control or insecticide alone or oil alone. Lifeguard is a biological control agent, also reduced PVY, but it also impacted marketable yield in a negative way, or yield in general by negative way. This is my last slide, take-home message, plant disease-free certified seed potatoes, grade at tubers with obvious symptoms and rot. When it comes to late blight, I recommend that you wash a sample of potatoes that say 100 tubers underwater and inspect them for signs and symptoms of late blight. And then you would know if you have 1%, 2%, and now you know what 1% of late blight in a seed lot means. Disinfect cutting equipment and apply seed treatment immediately after cutting. Cut, treat, and plant. Try not to store long time after you cut and treat your seed. And that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Khalil. That was a great presentation. And reminder, if you have any questions for Khalil or our next presenter, Ryan, please type these into the chat box at any time during the webinar, and we'll address them during the question and answer session after the presentation. And just a reminder that we'll show the CCA code on the screen after the presentations are finished. And our final presenter of today is Ryan Barrett, who is the Research and Agronomy Specialist with the PEI Potato Board. In this role, Ryan coordinates local and national research projects with several different partners, as well as conducting on-farm research trials with several PEI potato growers. Ryan graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from Dalhousie University in 2002 and a Master of Science degree from the University of Guelph in 2004. He has worked with the PEI Potato Board since 2012 after previously working in the purebred dairy cattle industry. Ryan continues to be involved in his family's dairy farm in Belmont, PEI, breeding registered milking shorthorns, and he also serves as the secondary manager of the Canadian Milking Shorthorn Society. Ryan is a professional agrologist and serves as the president-elect of the PEI Institute of Agrologists. He's also a certified crop advisor for the Atlantic provinces and serves on the board of directors for the Potato Association of America, the PEI 4-H Council, and the Eastern Canadian Oilseed Development Association. Take it away, please, Ryan.
All right, thanks, Ashley. So Khalil did a great job of reviewing really a lot of the disease management issues that we face in planting our next crop of potatoes and what we can do in managing seed to look at things from a disease standpoint. I'm going to focus more on managing our seed lot, ideally to do the least amount of cutting to maximize the viability and the vigor of that seed lot, and what we can do in terms of our handling procedures to make sure that we're preserving the most amount of growth potential out of our seed. So what are some of the key attributes of a quality seed lot? Of course, free of disease. Khalil just went over a bunch of these. There's a few more in there too, things like quarantinable pests like BRR, but also things like blackleg, we're seeing a lot more of in recent years, silver scurf. So there's lots of things that we can try. That we have a seed certification program, and we have our treatment programs to try and keep our seed as free of disease as possible. Then there are things like physiological age and the maturity of that seed, the quality of how that seed's been handled. So things like bruising, mechanical injury, and superization, and managing a seed size profile. So ideally, we don't have too much that's too small and too much that's really large and needs to be cut into many pieces that may also impact the vigor of that seed. And why all of these things are, if you're not a seed grower and you're purchasing seed from somebody else, many of these things are often determined by the time you receive that seed. They need to be managed before that seed arrives at your farm. So you have to have a good relationship with your seed producer to be able to know that you're getting high quality seed to try and avoid those problems. And then once you receive that seed, making sure you're not making it any worse, and you're trying to minimize losses. I want to touch just briefly on physiological age. We could talk all afternoon about physiological age of seed. It's largely influenced by the variety. The end use is going to be a big part of this. A huge part of the physiological age of seed is the growing conditions of the year before. Was the year before hot and dry? If it was, your seed's probably going to be more physiologically aged than if it was a ideal growing season, or you had all your seed under irrigation, that sort of thing. The storage temperature that you're keeping your seed at about 4 degrees Celsius. We're not adding age onto the seed, but above that we are. And the big part is that we really can't turn the clock backwards. So as we add age to seed, we can't really reverse that trend, at least not with the products we have available in Canada. So, and why this is important is that as seed gets older, it generally breaks apical dominance. We usually have more tubers of smaller size. As we have younger seed, we usually have fewer tubers of larger size. So depending on the variety you're growing, if you're growing russet Burbank or Clearwater and varieties that normally set a lot of tubers, and you want to make sure you don't get small ones in your resultant commercial crop, you maybe want to keep that seed younger than if you're growing a variety where generally we struggle with tuber numbers. So I'm thinking maybe a variety like Dakota Russet, where we have fewer tubers per plant. And we may want to age that seed a little bit to try and influence that. So can we manipulate physiological age during seed storage to influence the resultant crop? And how do we do this? We initiated a little bit of research here under our AIM program, look at both sides of this. But can we add some degree days to seed without having it go out of condition early in the storage season prior to breaking dormancy for varieties where we think that might have a benefit? And then can we also measure the influence of keeping seed cool, again, for varieties that we want to reduce those tuber numbers and increase tuber size? We did this in 2020 and 2021, where we did what we call a winter warm-up, where we took some seed out of the pile for different varieties and took it out of the conventional storage and put it under warmer temperatures for about 15 to 20 days, measured that with a temperature logger. And what we were really doing was in the winter warm-up program, we were adding somewhere between 145 to 190 degree days more than the control from the same seed lot under the same storage conditions. And then we also looked at refrigerated seed, where we were replicating, where we were keeping the seed more refrigerated, cooler, longer before seed cutting and before planting than if we were just allowing the seed storage to kind of naturally warm up as they do in the spring. And in this case, we had somewhere around 225 to 400 fewer degree days where we had the refrigeration versus the conventional storage. Everything else was managed the same. So the seed source, the fertility, the storage, the spacing, that was all done exactly the same. The key points I'll show you is that on the winter warming project over a couple of years, in the first year, we really only had one variety that showed a significant increase in yield from that winter warming, which was the Mountain Gem. And in the second year, we had Dakota Russet showed a positive response at 2 sites, which was a little opposite of the year before. But I think in the second year, we had a little bit more difference on the seed, and it showed. And the Mountain Gem, we had a mixed response. It did respond at one site and not at the other. But the other varieties really didn't show much difference, didn't show much response from aging that seed. And that may be that we didn't add enough physiological age. We maybe didn't have enough degree days added to show a response, or 2019 and 2020 were dry, hot growing seasons of PEI. So for some of the seed, it may have already been sufficiently aged that adding a little bit more age onto it wasn't going to show much of a response. However, on the refrigerated seed side, on the russet Burbanks, over 3 site years in this trial, we did have a significant increase in marketable yield where we kept it refrigerated. And that's very consistent with what we've seen in other trials and what I know other people have seen in other trials. We had somewhat more inconsistent results with Clearwaters that probably needs to be investigated a little bit further. Alverstone russet, we only did the refrigeration in 2021, and it showed an average improvement of about 5,300 weight. So again, that's a variety where we're trying to control tuber numbers and increase tuber size. So keeping that seed cool may have some real benefit. I talked about seed size profile, and in our AIM program over the last number of years, we've been working on some multiple trials with producers with the goal of how do we cut less seed while still ensuring that the seed producer is able to produce a profitable crop. So what are the ways that we can look at to produce generally the same 100 weight of seed, but with more tubers and smaller average tuber size? And the reason for that is if we can get a more consistent run of seed, that's more of it is between, say, 3 and 7 ounces in size, then hopefully we'll have less seed that needs to be cut, which results in less seed wastage, more consistent seed piece size, and hopefully a more consistent emergence of crop, and hopefully an increased yield and quality on our commercial crop. So we've tried a few different management practices over the last few years. Nitrogen rate and reducing nitrogen rate has been one that we've looked at, and what I'm going to talk about here too. Use of gibberellic acid and whole seed management. I'm going to talk first about whole seed management. We did some trials with a cooperator here with Genesis Crop Systems in 2016, 2017, where we were looking at russet Burbank prospects. And basically, we were looking at if we had a regular run of cut seed of about 2.3 ounces in size, and we compared that against small whole seed at 2 spacings and large whole seed pieces at two seed spacings. And what we're really trying to understand is there a yield difference in the yield potential of those cut versus non-cut seed, and does it make a difference in terms of small versus big, or the different types of spacings? And this is the results we saw averaged over 2 years. And this is the difference from the cut seed, taking the cut seed as our control, okay? So basically we saw that the small whole seed and the large whole seed in general had the same or better yield than the cut seed, with slightly fewer defects, slightly more smalls, and less percent over 10 ounce. But for the larger whole seed pieces, those 2.5 to 4 ounce seed pieces, they did have a higher dollars per acre in terms of resultant value. What becomes clear is that when you're comparing cut seed against whole seed, one thing that we really need to do is dial in exactly what our seed spacing is, because you can see there's a big difference from that whole seed between doing it at the tighter spacings and the larger space and the wider spacings. So the bigger the seed, the more that generally we're going to have to increase the seed spacing. The smaller the seed, we'll have to tighten it up a little bit. So again, we have about the same or better total yield over these 2 trials, slightly more smalls, slightly fewer percent 10 ounce, but the same or better crop value. And what we don't factor into the economics here is that, for whole seed that you don't have to cut, you do have reduced cutting costs, of course, right? And hopefully reduced wastage from that seed, which when we're cutting seed, a lot of times we can be up around 10 to 15% in terms of wastage from that seed. So just some other things to consider. These trials were compared with whole seed with hand cut seed. So It might be even more instructive if we were to take seed right off a commercial cutter. Hard to do necessarily in a research trial, but something to consider. In a normal run of seed that goes from 1.5 to more than 10 ounce tubers, we have lots of highly variable seed piece sizes and shapes. We can have trim dies, we can have slivers, we can have blind sets. So these are just things to consider in terms of if we can find ways to cut seed into at least fewer pieces, if not cutting it at all, we avoid some of that variability, we avoid some of those issues. But this is also, for depending on the variety, this may be more potential than others, because we know that there are some varieties that it seems to be very hard to keep them in that prime seed size of less than 7 ounces. Some varieties have more eyes than others. So again, that becomes more of an issue with certain varieties. So, there's no one recipe to all of this. I'm not saying that we should all move to just whole seed. It may work for certain varieties and for certain people, but if we can try and find ways to size our seed so that we have less cutting, particularly for some of our larger, chunkier varieties, I think that has some real potential as well. And just a couple of other considerations around whole seed. We do have some growers that they're able to size out some of their whole seed, and they make it so that it doesn't go over the cutter, and it can be planted separately. And so that can be planted maybe at a different spacing to improve that consistency of emergence. And maybe they make a decision as to, does that require a change in seed piece treatment or something like that, right? Also, whole seed can generally be planted into slightly cooler ground. And that may enable you to increase the size of your planting window because it's less susceptible to soft rot diseases and things that we can get in cooler ground or that are, early in the season, maybe wetter conditions. So I know there are some producers, they plant their whole seed first and then they plant the rest of their seed after, and that just enables them to go 2, 3, 4 days earlier. And of course, the effective apical dominance, blind sets, fewer eyes per set, multiple cut sides. These all are, big considerations in terms of deciding, what is your average seed piece size and how do you want to size your seed. Another factor in terms of managing the size of our seed lot is reducing our nitrogen amounts and nitrogen rates. So we've got quite a few growers in PEI that have been experimenting with reducing nitrogen on their seed. We have some producers that use quite low nitrogen already on their seed, and they're very happy with that. We're working with some more producers, especially some of the newer seed producers, just around managing this and trying to compare sort of the regular rate versus a decreased rate of nitrogen. This trial from 2019, we had Shepherd's and russet Burbanks, and what you can see is that really we have very little difference in seed in seed yield between the high and low rates. We actually were able to decrease nitrogen by 40 pounds an acre for the Burbanks and 22 pounds an acre for the Shepherd's. And we have similar tuber numbers, which indicates to me that maybe even the low rate may still be high enough nitrogen. But decreasing the nitrogen rates in this case, we didn't have really much of a decrease. We look at that prime seed line in the middle, the third column along, we see that the low nitrogen had the highest yield in that prime seed, which is the under 7 ounce seed piece size. Again, we followed up with some more trials over the last few years. This is some work we did last year with a grower in Dakota russets. You can see we're getting quite low on the nitrogen side here. And even so, decreasing the nitrogen by 20 pounds an acre, or about 20% in this case, we did have slightly more tubers per plot where we had that lower nitrogen, and we had a slightly higher yield where we had that lower nitrogen. It's not statistically different in this case, just based a bit on the sampling of the field, but it's similar to a trend that we've seen in some other trials here in the last few years. And Dakota russets are a variety that sometimes struggle with tuber number per plant. So if anything we can do to increase those tuber numbers while not sacrificing our total yield, particularly for seed, has some real potential. And what is the effective seed piece size? So, this year in a lot of parts of Canada and North America, seed supply is tight. So there can be pressure on the grower side to cut seed smaller because I want to make my seed go further because I just don't have that much seed around. But we've seen in a lot of trials over a lot of years that smaller seed pieces with more cut edges and smaller overall size do have a lower yield potential, a higher risk of non-emergence, and they generally don't pay for themselves. So what is the sweet spot for cut seed piece size? This is just a slide from Dr. Mark Pavic from Washington State University, where they did some comparisons side by side. They start as low as 1/2 ounce seed piece size on the far left, all the way up to 3.5 ounces on the far right. But you can see generally anything over 2 ounces in his trial looked pretty vigorous, but there definitely is a increase in vigor on those plants and emergence as they went from left to right. And so we try to replicate this a little bit at home. We did this work in partnership with Agriculture Canada at Harrington and PEI. And you can see we had 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3 ounce seed pieces. And what you can see is we didn't have a big difference in emergence, but we did have a statistical difference in terms of the number of stems per plant, with the higher seed pieces having the higher number of stems per plant. And this was in Dakota russets. And when it came to looking at that for yield and quality, you can see that we generally had higher total yield on the 2.5 and the 3 ounce side. That didn't really manifest as much on the marketable yield side. And the reason is we had slightly higher amount of smalls and less 10 ounce on those higher seed piece sizes, which tells me we needed to space those tubers out a little bit more. We needed to adjust the planting spacing. So again, that when you're looking at different seed piece sizes, and if you're looking at changing your average seed piece size for your run of seed, you're going to have to consider how that impacts your spacing, especially for certain varieties. But in this case, if we had spaced those two larger sizes out a little bit, I think we would have seen more impact on the marketable yield. So again, larger seed piece size is generally associated with better yield. In general, cut seed pieces under 1.5 ounce, they struggle to produce a viable plant, or if they do, they're more at risk of disease. Keeping your average seed size 2.3 to 2.5 ounces is usually about the sweet spot for most varieties. You may, depending on the variety, you may have to adjust that slightly, but like these little chats that are going in this box at seed cutting last year in PEI, that's the stuff you need to get rid of, because that's the stuff that's not going to pay off for you in the field. Managing seed size, again, gibberellic acid, this has been around for a while, and we have quite a few people that use it in seed. We wanted to look at on a couple of slow emerging varieties, whether or not it had an impact. We have a couple of varieties like Payette russets, can be a little bit slow out of the ground. Dakotas can be as well. So we wanted to look at a couple of rates of gibberellic acid and see whether it helped us out any. What I can tell you is that for the Dakotas and the Payettes with gibberellic acid, we did get a little faster emergence. We did get more stems per plant, which was expected. And we didn't really see much difference in marketable yield, though. We got higher tuber numbers, but all those extra tuber numbers were in the smaller size profile. So again, has potential for the seed producer, maybe not so much for the French fry processing grower. Again, it kind of emphasizes the value that gibberellic acid can have for the seed producer that's trying to alter the size profile of their seed, but not so much for the commercial producer. And just because we're getting tight on time, I want to just focus for a couple minutes on sort of seed handling and bruising and mechanical damage, and how we can treat our seed as best as we can to get the most value out of it, right? To get the best yield performance out of it. We do have a fact sheet on this on the PEI Potato Agronomy site. If you want to take a look at that, it's available for anybody to read. But basically, one of the main things is reducing your drop height. Every time you can keep that drop height to less than 6 inches, and ideally as low as possible, the better. You can see this producer's done a really good job of they're monitoring that bin piler and keeping it right at the top, right by where the seed is dropping. He's minimized that height to less than an inch, and that's not going to put any bruise on those on that cut seed as it's going into the bulk box, which is terrific. This is a producer. He's got an old bin piler that he's retrofitted with this optical eye. And so that it doesn't have to have one person just constantly monitoring the height of the bin piler. The bin piler is being automatically adjusted so that it is just letting it off at the top of the pile. It's not, there's no drop here whatsoever. And that's really going to keep bruises off of that seed as much as possible and retain the yield potential of that seed. Set cutter disinfection is a big story that we've talked about in recent years. Particularly, we've got some more aggressive strains of blackleg around, and I know there's been some people that have questions about things like BRR and other bacterial diseases, other fungal diseases. So, seed cutter disinfection is a potential option for some people. We had a few growers in PEI that have added these sort of spray bars to their cutters in the last few years. Pretty relatively inexpensive retrofit on the seed cutters, and they have these nozzles that spray right onto the knives, and they're putting it on every 4 minutes or so, every 4 or 5 minutes. That's making sure that they're trying to get some disinfectant onto those knives more often, hopefully with the risk of spreading less blackleg in those seed lots, particularly some varieties that seem to be a little more susceptible than others. So when it comes to set cutter maintenance and calibration, make sure your rollers are on the right sizes. Adjust those flow volumes to ensure that you've got even cutting. You don't have potatoes, bunching up and getting on top of each other, that you've got bruising from bouncing around and maybe not being cut in the right place. Keeping the knives sharp to avoid jagged edges on your cut surfaces. Again, checking that horizontal knife for the ones that are getting cut in half on the top, and opening up that chip eliminator to discard those pieces less than 1.5, because remember, those small seed pieces, you might get a plant out of them, but they're not going to pay for themselves. So it's important to take a look at that, and frequently take samples of your seed profile to make sure, do I need to make an adjustment? And that's multiple times a day, and that's with every variety, because you need to be making sure, keep it on top of that. Do I need to adjust it up or down just to make sure that you're meeting your targets in terms of, if you're aiming for 2.5 ounces, are you at 2.5 ounces? And some general best management practices for seed cutting. Warming up your seed before cutting will help encourage suberization and clean cutting. You won't get those, again, jagged edges on the cut seed pieces. Avoiding those drops. A drop of 6 inches onto an edge or a corner can cause bruise almost up to 100% of the time. So if we can avoid those drops, that's worth a lot. Do not cut or store seed in a storage that was previously treated with CIPC. We've seen from past research by lots of different people that this can have significant yield robbing on your resultant crop. Just by having it in that building for a couple of weeks, it can have a noticeable impact. Removing those visibly diseased tubers before cutting, like Khalil said, and using that registered fungicide seed treatment, and getting your seed dried back down without loose water to avoid soft rot decay. Not piling the seed very high. Pile it as low as you can with the maximum ventilation. So that's my contact information if you want to get a hold of me. Thank you very much to the funders of our AIM projects, so largely the growers of Prince Edward Island, the Prince Edward Island Department of Agriculture in partnership with AAFC and their CAP program, and Cavendish Farms. They're all funding partners and programming partners for our AIM program. With that, I'll take some questions.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Great job. So now is, as Ryan said, it's time for the questions. So we have some in the chat box. And if you have any more to ask Ryan or Khalil, please type them in now. So our first question comes from Antonio Walker. And I think this is for Khalil. In terms of mineral oil, what types are you using?
Yes, Antonia, I actually double checked with my colleague Matish Singh because he works a lot in this. And the product that is used the most, at least in New Brunswick, is called Superior 70. Seems to be the product that is most common to be used on potatoes.
Thank you. And now a question from Leonard Rossnagel. How much longer can seed treatments containing mancozeb be used?
Leonard, I hope as long as we can keep it going. Mancozeb seem to be working on many diseases, and as long as it is used correctly and handled correctly and safely, I think we should be able to continue using it. I'm not sure what the PMRA's latest decision is with mancozeb, but as of 2020, my understanding that the continued registration of products containing mancozeb was deemed to be acceptable. So I hope that would be the case for a while. We'll know more, I guess, once new decisions become available.
So if I can add to that, I believe that actually in the most recent result or decision from PMRA, that mancozeb is not going to be available for seed piece treatments after the transition time to change their labels and that sort of thing. So I think we should be preparing for not being able to use those products for very much longer.
Did they put a deadline or just until the labels are changed?
There is a deadline. I just can't seem to put my hands on it at the minute, but I will look that up.
Okay.
For anyone interested in that, we do have a story on spudsmart.com from Tracy Shinners-Carnelli from the Manitoba Potato Production Days, where she shared an update on all the latest PMRA decisions. So if you just go to our website and type in Tracy Shinners-Carnelli, there's a great story that has all those deadlines that are very important to keep in mind. And I think just a question I had myself. I know, Ryan, you were mentioning about how that seed supply is quite tight this year. So and you said that people should really think before they cut their seed pieces to a small. So is there anything else you could maybe say for recommendations on when we're looking at the seed supply situation this year and making sure that you're making the best use of the seed that you're able to procure so that it grows into the most healthy and high yielding crop you can?
Well, I guess all I would say, Ashley, is that I understand if growers are worried about seed supply is slightly tight and they're worried I'm going to have to make my seed go further. I can understand that, and I think it comes to just trying to find the right way to manage what you have, but don't go too far to the don't cut your seed too small to the point where you're getting more of that stuff that's 1.5 ounce and more stuff you might even have to throw away, more cut ends on the seed and more tubers that are less viable, because in most of the trial work that I've seen, it's the seed pieces over 2 ounces and higher that generally have the highest yield potential. And the stuff that's under 2 ounces, a lot of time it'll grow and it'll make yield, but it won't really much more than pay for itself, and it may not even pay for itself. So you're probably better to grow fewer acres with the best chance at yield than spread that out over more acres and have a lower yield. It's because all your other application costs, all your other fertility costs, and everything else is often per acre. So that's the sort of things that we have to manage and keep in mind when we're cutting seed.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I can just, I went to that article that you mentioned, and Tracy's update says that as of November 19th, 2022, mancozeb is no longer allowed to be used for seed piece treatments, but continues to be allowed for 8 foliar applications per year.
Thanks, Ryan, for looking that up. And thank you so much for your comments about in regards to seed piece side. So what I'm getting from you is that make sure to take quality over quantity when it comes to planting this year.
Definitely.
And that's all we have for questions today. And next up, we have the CCA code here on screen. So please scan this. And if you have any trouble scanning the code, you can email me at arobinson@seedworldgroup.com. And please include your name and your CCA number in the email. So I'll just leave that up for another second for you guys to scan. Oh, and we had a comment from Ryan Van Oomstrom in the chat here that I'm just going to share. Ryan, on the go cutter disinfecting, shutting down the system or seed kept going during the spray. So that's just a quick question there, Ryan, if you want to answer it while people may be scanning the code on the screen.
We've had some producers doing both. So some of them have them timed to go during cutting, and others have them timed to, like, they can briefly shut the cutter off, long enough for the disinfection, and then turning it back on. But it's just about getting the spray on the knives more often without necessarily having a huge volume of moisture on those potatoes, so that we're not getting too much free moisture on those potatoes, but we are trying to spray directly on those knives and keep the bacterial volume down as much as we can. And if Mark, if you want to follow up with me directly on that, I'd be happy to chat with you about that tomorrow.
Thank you, Ryan. And I'll just do a quick thank you right now, of course, to both you and Khalil for joining us in your presentations today. They were both very insightful, and I hope everyone listening learned a lot.
Thank you.
And I would also once again like to thank our sponsor, McCain, for making this webinar possible. And thank you to everyone for attending. I hope you found this information valuable. And just a reminder that a recording of this webinar will be made available on spudsmart.com sometime this week. And thanks again for attending, and have a lovely day.